Today you're going to be creating a Scratchboard value scale. So here's an example here that has 6 different values on the value scale. You're going to create one that has 7. So in the classroom there are several little printed copies of this value scale. You can use this to assist as you create your own. There are several scraps lying around. They might be various different lengths. You will need to separate it into 7 blocks. So like this one has 6 blocks. Yours needs to have 7. You can use a ruler to help you do this. There are also pieces of chalk, white chalk in the classroom. The chalk is nice because if you use it on the Scratchboard, you can smear it off, versus if you were to use a pencil, like this little scrap has pencil on it, I can't erase that, because what do you think is going to happen if you try to erase on Scratchboard? It will most likely remove the India ink, which is the top layer here, the black that is scratched away. Okay, so first of all, these pieces of chalk, if you look at it, the edge is kind of sharp, right? So it can easily scratch this surface. If you take just a scratch piece of paper, whether it be from recycle bin or is now some computer paper located in the very bottom right cubby that you can take some out of, just move the edge along the paper to kind of dull that sharpness, okay? All right, so I have my scrap piece here. I already kind of made myself some little lines just to make this quicker. So now I'm going to just draw a quick line with the chalk. And don't press too hard as well. I mean, there is still a chance that you could scratch it off. So just a light layering there. Obviously, it's not perfect. It doesn't need to be. But I always want to make sure I have enough sections here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so now you're going to use the scratching tool. This one's slightly different than the ones in the classroom. This is just a different one that I have. Yours have like a red handle, or there's some with a wooden handle. They might all have slightly different tips on them. For this case, for making the value scale, it doesn't really matter. The smaller like wood tools, don't use those for this example. You can use the wood handled ones that have a fine point on it, or the ones with the red handle. So first, I think it's best to take a little scrap piece and just kind of test and see what your tool is capable of. Some directions might be a little easier to create, or excuse me, some directions might be easier to go than others with each different tool. So test it out. I think it's a little more difficult to make curves or like wavy lines. So always have a scrap piece of Scratchboard with you so you can test things out as you go. In this case with the value scale, it's not crucial, but it's nice for you to be able to feel out what it's like to create the hatch marks before you start. The key with creating hatch marks is to not scribble. You can't do that. That just looks messy. You're working too quickly, and it could be likely that you're ruining the board underneath. If you press too hard, it will kind of dent the Scratchboard, so you can't do that either. So like if I were to press super hard here, I don't know that you can see it on the video, but it definitely indented on the Scratchboard. All right, so what your hatch marks need to look like are just creating several lines. If they're closer together, what type of value do you think that would create? Would it be dark? Is it light? If you said light, you're correct. So always remember, the closer that the lines are together, the lighter the value. And the farther apart that they are, the darker the value, right? If we were to look on our value scale here and trying to determine what value might that be similar to, okay? All right, so now let's move on to creating your value scale. So I would say go ahead and create a line in between each of your blocks here, because your chalk will wipe off as you're working. Doesn't have to be perfect, just creating a separation. All right, so I think this is gonna, since it's the largest block, I will just keep it black. That is my darkest value. I'm gonna start with the lightest value down here. Or actually, I mean, really you can start either way, darkest to lightest, but I find it easier to just go ahead and start with the lightest. Okay, I've created several different hatch marks that are all going the same direction. Direction is really important when you are creating scratchboard etching. If they're going all sorts of different directions, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't look as natural. And what you guys will be working on are animals that have fur or hair. So the direction of the line is really important. Now, I know that this is not quite light enough yet, but it's always good to stop and take a look, because once you've removed the material, you can't put it back. So it never hurts to slow down and just pause and take a look at where you're at. Okay, so that's pretty good. If I feel like I need to remove more after making some of my other values, I can. Notice that I've been using just a little cheapy brush. I'll have some of these in the classroom for you, just to gently wipe away that India ink. But please be considerate about cleaning up your mess at the end of the day. There are some blue paper towels towards the back of the classroom along the window ledge. Don't necessarily use a whole paper towel. You could even split it into fours, right? And just rip it in half and then rip it in half again, just to be able to wipe up a little bit of that India ink off the table so it doesn't get on clothes or anybody else. All right, so now I'm going to move on to my next value. Oh, one thing I want to mention though, notice how I didn't remove everything. It is not a complete solid white like you might think it would be with a regular value scale. If you remove all of the white, which with some of these tools you can kind of use the side to remove quite a bit, it actually just kind of stands out like way too much. So I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to completely remove all of that. I want it to show a little bit of black still. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to move on to the next block, and I will hatch a few less times than this one. This one takes the absolute longest. So once you've done that, it'll go a little bit faster. One thing to also point out, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm going several different directions, either starting from up here and coming down or going down to up. It doesn't matter. It's whatever you're comfortable with. I do kind of have to rotate my tool though to try and just use the edge of the tip of this blade here. All right, now I'm going to stop there, and work on the next block. And then, like I said before, if I feel like I need to remove a little bit more just to make those values continue evenly, then I'll do so. Notice how this time I'm spreading my marks really far apart from each other, just to start out with. I feel like I could have done a little bit better job on this value here, maybe a tiny bit farther apart. These are kind of close. That's okay, I can't really go back. Okay, so brush that off. So I have my value scale here, going from lightest to darkest, similar to what you have up here, right? Okay, oops, sorry. All right, so now that you have a value scale to reference for yourself going forward, you should get one of these little spheres, and you are going to practice this sphere on another small piece. Oops, forgot about that. So, kind of push that aside. See, it can kind of just get all over your hands if you don't clean it up. All right, so this is just barely big enough for this. Hopefully I'll have some slightly larger pieces for you. First, what you'll want to do is create that sphere shape. I know it's not easy to get a perfect circle. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for you to practice these different values here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw the sphere with the chalk, and then I will maybe kind of create a little outline here of the shadow just so I know where it's at, and then I will start working from there. Okay, so obviously not a perfect circle. That's fine. As you create your lines, you can kind of make up for that. So I'm going to start again with the lightest value, and I know that that's over here because on this image, our light source is coming from this direction, and that creates the brightest, lightest area. Now, since this is a sphere, it is a round object, your hatch marks should somewhat reflect that. Now, I know it's kind of difficult to create rounded lines. It's not too bad. Or, excuse me, rounded hatch marks. Just do your best. What I'm mostly looking for is that you can replicate this, all these different values. All right, so this is kind of just a first preliminary practice. Looking for my lightest point, which I think is right about here. Trying to mimic the shape of the sphere. Don't just keep working and look away from your reference and think, okay, I know how this is going to go. Really pay attention. Okay, so notice how slow I worked, especially down in these areas where I'm still kind of like gradually building up the value to go from light to dark here. Now I can go back and create just a little bit lighter value here and make it gradual and blend it more into the darkest value. Like I said, it's best to stop, take a look, make sure you haven't carved away, or excuse me, etched away too much. If you have, can't really go back, but that's why you pause and take a look. Okay, I'm going to come back and do a little bit more on here, but I think what would help me is if I removed just a little bit around the sphere so I could start to see this round shape out here, and same with along the shadow. I kind of forgot this little spot right here when I was adding the shadow. Let's see. Okay, so this is like the only time that we're working on this project where it's okay to outline something. I want to make that really clear right now, and I'll keep repeating it as we work on this project. When you are doing the next practice, which is the cat face, you won't be outlining anything, and that also goes for your final as well. In this case, it wants to curve. In this case, we are outlining it purely because the background of this is a solid white. Okay, now I want to kind of wipe away that chalk. Might be a slight remnants of it, but just want to wipe it away so that way I can see things a little bit clearer here. You don't need to white out this entire background. I just want you to work on around the sphere so that way it pops a little bit more. And we know that this background here is our absolute lightest value. This is pretty close, but here it's still just a tiny bit of gray in there. Okay, so now that that kind of stands out, it's a little bit easier for me to see, and I'm going to go back in and continue to create the several different values within this sphere. Again, make sure, I know it's easy when you're working on this to just think, okay, it gradually gets darker, and just to create that on your own without looking at the image, but really continue to look back, because this area up here is still fairly light, so keep looking at that original image. That's definitely something that I'll keep reminding you to do as you work on your practice cat and your final Scratchboard. Okay, so I have finished my sphere and my value scale, and now that I'm done with this, I can move on to practicing with the cat image. All right, so for the practice cat image, you will have the image of the cat, which you need to cut all the way to the edge. And then, or I will have them pre-cut for you perhaps, and then a piece of paper that is the actual size, same size, which is 2 1/4 by 3. So I'll have those pre-cut for you, but you need those two. And then this is actually a scrap piece here that I'm going to use just for our demonstration, but you will have a clean piece of Scratchboard to work from as well. That is the exact same size, so 3 by 2 1/4. You're going to set your Scratchboard aside, and you need to work on drawing the cat image onto this piece of paper here. It's just computer paper, so if for any reason anything happens, just grab another one, or you can cut one down using the paper cutter, as long as I've demonstrated that to you. All right, so first I'm going to work on drawing cat on my piece of paper. If it helps you, you can take a ruler and go to the edge here and create a little crosshair. All right, so I have a nice little crosshair there. You can do that on the paper here too. All right, so I have my crosshair here, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with the eyes, or maybe even the nose, because the nose is right there at the center point for the crosshair, so that will be a nice starting place. So that's what I would recommend. As always, create real light lines. I tend to do like real short little lines. Everybody draws differently. It's entirely up to you on how you do this, but this is just how I do it. Okay, and then I'm thinking about this line here that comes down the center of the nose, right? It's the crease in the kind of the lip. It's looking at the distance of where that's at in comparison. Now this one's fairly easy to redraw, right? Because you're not scaling up, so it's exact. So this will be even easier than your last quadrant drawing to start out with. All right, so these lines that I'm creating here just above the nose is almost kind of just like a little marker for me, because I can see that the value that's within this section right here is different than the value that's right here. So I'm just going to kind of create those little lines for me now, so I don't have to, when I'm actually drawing, when I'm actually hatching, have to figure out where those lines are. And I'm kind of correcting my nose. All right, so now I'm going to move on to one of the eyes, and I'm thinking really hard about where this begins. So I can kind of see that it almost creates a little square right there. So I could even try and do that myself, just as a little thing in the background. It's kind of too small. I think it could be a little bit bigger. Okay, about there, and so I know that the corner of the eye starts there. Cat's eyes are very different from human eyes. They're so much more round. So automatically with an eye, I always try and create that little shape right there, but that's not really what it looks like on a cat. That's what it looks like on a human. Okay, now that I have just kind of that round shape there, I'm going to go ahead and go to the other side and create that as well, so it's matching before I add any more detail here. And you can do this either just by sight, or you can create, sorry, that's my dog, create a little line there just to help yourself see how big. I'm going to double check, make sure I got that close enough there, and it looks like I do. So I'm happy with that as well. You can use a ruler, or you can just kind of do it the way that I did, just straight across there. All right, so I want to see where that corner of that eye starts. This is a little more of a rectangular shape, whereas over here was kind of square. So I'm going to look across here. All right. So again, thinking about that rectangular shape, how far does it come out? So I kind of maybe plot a point right there. I think, yeah, that seems about right. It might come out just a little bit farther. I think if that's the same, that looks pretty accurate. Okay, so I know that the corner of that eye starts there. And I know how round it needs to be, or how big I should say, because I've created these lines here. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and start completing some of the details here. One thing that I think might be helpful is when you're doing your drawing, if you notice some areas that have really dark values next to really light values, add those lines to your drawing, so that way when we transfer this to the Scratchboard, it'll be obvious. where the okay. So here I have not a complete illustration of this image here. It is a really rough draft, so I just wanted to be able to place what is where. So nose, eyes, the little highlights, and starting to tell myself where some of these darker areas are. So that way, when we transfer this here, I know where some of the values are already. So like just this little section here, I just created that line there because it looks like this lightest value ends right here. And same with down here, it kind of just comes around a little bit more. I'm not going to do anything with these whiskers. I could, but I feel confident that it would just be a little bit easier to do that directly on the Scratchboard. It'll be a little easier to plot where those lines are versus just having to draw them. Okay, so now you're going to get a piece of tape, which I need to get one. Okay, so I have my drawing. I'm actually going to take this piece of chalk here, and I'm going to scribble all over the back, which is going to be weird. You won't necessarily be able to see it. Try and hold your drawing so that way it doesn't wrinkle like I just did to mine. And in this case, we need to cover the whole surface. When you're working on your larger drawings, you might not need to go to the edge. It just depends how far to the edge or where your creature is at. Since it's a little hard to see, just definitely make sure you have enough chalk on there. All right, I don't know if you noticed when I covered the back in chalk, I colored, or I moved my chalk one direction and went all the way across and covered the whole thing, and then I actually turned it and I went back the opposite direction of that. That kind of fills in any gaps you may have missed. There's a bunch of chalk on this. You could take it to the trash can and dump it out, or just kind of tap it off to the side for now. Okay, so carefully take your image, place it over your Scratchboard, and then take a piece of tape and just put a little bit onto the drawing, not too much in case for some reason you need to remove it, and then fold that over to the back side. This way you can still flip this up to see your Scratchboard. Make sure it doesn't move. If it's going to do that, then you might need another piece of tape. And it could be just a lot smaller one, barely touching, just to hold it in place. Okay, so now I'm going to take, you can do this with a colored pencil or a pen. You can still do it with a pencil if you want. The advantage of using a colored pencil or a pen is that you'll see where you've drawn. So what this does is it transfers your drawing from the one that you created onto the Scratchboard. Now the reason we're doing it this way is because you can't really, like I said, erase on the Scratchboard. So I'm going to go ahead and just start creating lines where I have placed them on my drawing. I don't need to transfer my cross hatching, or sorry, my cross hair. You can if you want to. It just might get distracting later. Okay, really paying attention to where these lines are. If I have something solid, I'm gonna kind of fill it in, or excuse me, dark, not solid. Now I realize your drawing is considered what? This is an additive process, right? And then when you go to your Scratchboard, it's going to be a subtractive process. So what that does is kind of make things opposite. So when we created our drawing, it was dark, we added dark to a light surface, and now we're going to be removing the light surface. So just have to think about that when you're working on your Scratchboard. I will have some extra ones cut just so that way you can, if you're like, whoa, I totally messed up, need to start over, and you recognize that, then go ahead and do so. Don't just like get into things all fast and furious and be like, oh, whoops, I messed up. You know, really take your time, use materials wisely and not wastefully. Okay, I have my basic outline done. Let's see if I can get the tape off here. Okay, so your drawing is transferred onto the Scratchboard now. It is only transferred with chalk, and like I said, the advantage with chalk is that it wipes away. You just have to be careful when you're working to not wipe away your design. So one way you can do that to help is by taking like a scrap piece of paper and gently laying it over the top and holding your Scratchboard in place. And then you can come in, let's see, and hold your hand over here on the scrap piece of paper before you get started. All right, I'm going to turn it over to a different demo video in order for you to follow along completing the Scratchboard with your cat.